Hmm. Oh. Yes!
I was excited to see the return of Bayonetta in her latest entry, but after playing the game, I was disappointed with a few elements, and I wanted to review that disappointment in detail. Specifically, I think Bayonetta 3 is a step backwards in gameplay and theme. The plot is a mess, and the enemy and cutscene design fails to highlight the character. Alright, time to chop this up into chapters. Naturally, we've got big spoilers for Bayonetta 1 and 3. The Bayonetta series is part of the spectacle fighter subgenre, with the most popular series in that genre being Devil May Cry, of course. The genre is characterized by difficult or technical combat, extensive combos, strong defensive options, and grandiose boss fights. The genre greatly expanded in the era of PlayStation 2, and Bayonetta picked up a lot of lessons from other games at that time. Bayonetta brings four signature innovations that set it apart. Those are Witch Time, Wicked Weaves, Shootout, and Dodge Offset. The sequels add more new mechanics that I think detract more than they add. Between Devil May Cry and Bayonetta, the designers that would become Platinum Games made a cult classic called Beautiful Joe, which director Hideki Kamiya referred to as a staff-focused project used to refine the designer's skills. Combat in Joe focuses on avoiding attacks, then activating slow motion to dole out the punishment. Sound familiar? If Bayonetta dodges an attack with narrow timing, she'll activate Witch Time, slowing everything else while the player is free to attack. Rewarding the player for proper defense is a teaching mechanism that instructs the player to play methodically instead of mashing buttons and relying on hit stun. This is a principle likewise adopted by the Dark Souls series. Bayonetta's dodge has a snappy startup and an extravagant animation, and you can freely cancel from almost any point in an attack into a dodge. The mechanic is largely similar in the sequels, with one major exception in Bayonetta 3. Bayonetta 3 introduces Viola, a secondary character you must play for certain chapters, similar to Dante in Devil May Cry 4. Viola's dodge is less extravagant and can't activate Witch Time. It has good frame data, but she's intended to be a blocking character that can only activate Witch Time through a perfect parry. Her parry timing is slimmer than the timing for Bayonetta's Witch Time dodge, and it uses a different button, which can be difficult to adapt to. Viola has several moves that involve throwing her sword, which disables blocking and thus denies Witch Time until the sword comes back. Wicked Weaves is collectively the name for your combo finishers, which hit hard, cover more ground, and can apply knockdown or knock up that puts the enemy into longer combo states. Wicked Weaves reward you for being able to finish a combo instead of just using the moves along the way. Bayonetta 3 changes some of the visual flair around Wicked Weaves, but inherits a mechanic from Platinum's previous game Astral Chain called the Summon Flash, which provides an additional hard-hitting combo ender. In Astral Chain, you don't have Wicked Weaves and the Summon Flash, but in Bayonetta 3, you've got a double whammy at the end of your combos. It's not inherently problematic to do this, but it creates a conflict with some of the other core mechanics to focus on the end of the combos and move away from during the combo itself. There are also points in the game where the hit stun of a summon flash can lock bosses into a loop and trivialize them. There can be visual noise issues as well that arise around the summon flash, making it difficult to respond to certain enemy attacks in the late game. Shooting out is the ability for Bayonetta to hold a button during a combo in order to fire guns between attacks, or do a couple other things depending on the weapon. The properties of shooting out vary with your weapon selection, but fundamentally what this allows you to do is to control your combo timing while outputting serious damage. Some weapons have smooth, continuous damage like Bayonetta's Scarborough Fair, or Three's Spider Yo-Yos, which are one of the most powerful weapons ever to be released in Bayonetta. Other weapons have clunky or slow shootouts, like Bayonetta 3's G-Pillar or Everything Viola Does. It's not very flashy, but shootout does better damage than your standard attacks, and it cooperates very well with the next mechanic I'm going to explain. Being the title with the broadest range of weapons, Bayonetta 3 has the best and the worst of the shootout options, making some weapons godlike and others a waste. Lastly, dodge offset allows you to continue your current combo while performing a dodge by holding down the attack button you last used while you commit to the dodge, and then just continuing the combo inputs afterwards. You should already be holding down the attack button because of the shootout mechanic, and since you're pacing out your dodges by virtue of holding down that button for shootouts and using the dodge offsets, it's going to be easier for you to line up your dodges with attacks to try and trigger witch time. And if you dodge offset your way through a full combo, you'll get access to a wicked weave. So everything's just coming together with this mechanic. Thankfully, dodge offset doesn't change from game to game, although I find it has a bit of a poor translation to Viola's combat. You can offset using her dodge or her block, but her shootout option is poor, and making an input mistake can result in accidentally inputting a charging attack that will interrupt your combo. This is because a button shortcut that exists throughout Bayonetta 3 is double tapping the right bumper, but the right bumper is shared as Viola's block input, while Bayonetta only uses that button to transform an attacking mode to a locked-on state, which is kind of a holdover from the previous games. Bayonetta also has a magic meter, which changes in function through each game. In Bayonetta 1, the magic meter is used to start a torture attack, a cutscene attack that does heavy damage to a single target. If a target's killed by a torture attack, they'll also drop a highly damaging limited-use angelic weapon. You lose magic for taking hits, so this mechanic rewards damage avoidance in the kind of mid to long term. In Bayonetta 2, the torture mechanic is still present, but you get an additional mechanic called Umbran Climax. When activated, this converts all your attacks to Wicked Weaves, and access to Umbran Climax completely overshadows torture attacks. You should almost never use them in Bayonetta 2. In 3, magic is instead used for the Demon Slave mechanic, which calls out a big, slow demon. Controlling the demon is less precise than controlling the summons from Astral Chain that you would move around using the right analog stick, and the demon takes aggro from enemies off of Bayonetta, eating away at the core gameplay loop of dodging and retaliating. I'm playing Bayonetta to fight the enemies personally, not to have something else fight the enemies for me. You can get torture attacks by stunning enemies using the demon, but your torture attack animations have less variety in Bayonetta 3 than they did in Bayonetta 1. The summon mechanic really feels to me like somebody shoehorned amusement park rides into my Kingdom Hearts. I don't have high expectation for level design in the entire genre, which seems like it's best served by just a series of corridors with enemies in them. Other titles use puzzles or looping areas, but the Bayonetta series has had fairly little of this, and I appreciate that. I've periodically gotten lost while playing Devil May Cry or God of War, and I just want to get back to the action. However, fully completing areas in Bayonetta 1 can be a chore and pretty deceptive. The game often presents a linear path, but requires you to backtrack in order to find secrets, and it can be obnoxious. To achieve full completion of the game, you may be expected to backtrack 2 to 3 times within the same chapter. Bayonetta 3 has a similar issue of placing things behind you, but features overall larger areas to the extent of having a button that you need to press to actually see where the objective is. These are big enough spaces to just get lost. The hidden objects in 3 are also more often cosmetic than they are in the previous games, where you could often find weapons by exploring areas. This is a booster pack. What is this a booster pack for? It felt less rewarding to explore, but exploration was also less compulsory. Overall, I just found the size of areas to be exhausting, and by the latter half of the game, I was trying to blitz through places. The health and magic upgrades you acquire through exploring and doing extra challenges also need to be allocated between Bayonetta and Viola, and an uneven distribution can exacerbate the challenge of the late game. Making a surprise entry on my hate list is the level up system that suddenly shows up in Bayonetta 3. I don't know why this was implemented. Bayonetta 1 progresses the character using a shop, very similar to Devil May Cry. There are a few meaningful mechanics that you buy once: the Stinger, the Riser, air dodge, an important defense called Bats Within, and a series of high-cost accessories that open up new combat options. In Bayonetta 3, you get 3 different currencies. One is used for some of the classic purchases. You can buy consumables and a few repetitive upgrades for like your health and things like that. One of the currencies is used for cosmetic and bonus content, and I don't have a problem with that. But your third currency is explicitly used as experience. It's required to unlock techniques on each of your individual weapons and demons. This is a system that is inherited from Astral Chain, and it's iterated and improved from Astral Chain because some of your core mechanics are removed from the level up systems that you always have access to them. In Astral Chain, you would have to rebuy core mechanics on each of your individual summons in order to use them. But that being said, the system's still a chore. You're still going to have to rebuy several command inputs on each of your individual weapons and demons. The arsenal in Bayonetta 3 is expansive, and getting a weapon in the latter half of the game that you haven't dropped any upgrades into at all decreases the likelihood that you'll ever bother with using that weapon. It snapped my camera off to that objective twice, and that's because it's based on like clicking down the left stick, which happens accidentally all the time. So maybe clicking down a stick should not mess up your camera.
Harry the bear! You serious? B-Blade! You're gonna pay!
I cannot like see what he's doing half the time. But we got there. The genre is not well known for plot, which tends to feel like you're just aimlessly wandering through an area. One trend of the spectacle fighter, especially the Platinum Games spectacle fighter, is a rival character with similar skills fought multiple times throughout the game. In Bayonetta 1, much of the game is traversal through Vigrid, punctuated by combat with the rival Jeanne and several prominent angels as Bayonetta seeks to recover her memory. The first major angel we fight in Bayonetta 1 is named Fortitude, so it's clear that we're going to fight the cardinal virtues, and we're going to fight Jeanne a few times. Bayonetta 3 has us going between worlds to collect 5 MacGuffins, and we face an initially unexplained rival who turns out to be Luka, who has suddenly become a powerful combatant for reasons that are only explained in text logs. Both plots have repetitive elements, and repetition isn't always bad. Repetition is part of how a game teaches a player and builds expectation. I love rematching rivals in successively more epic confrontations. Bayonetta 1 makes use of its traversal time for the characters to quip and progress relationships, exploring more about Cereza and Luka. Initially, this doesn't appear to relate to Bayonetta's conflict with the Angels, but the secondary conflict of Bayonetta is her lost memory, which relates directly to her personality, and so these interactions help us explore that. The ending twist of Bayonetta is that the villainous mastermind is Bayonetta's father, and the child Cereza is Bayonetta from the past. This dovetails the plotline with those character moments very nicely. In Bayonetta 3, the primary plotline takes us through various alternate universes where the same sequence of events happens every single time. We meet an alternate Bayonetta and her personal demon. There's sometimes a taste of thin characterization, but we're mostly just expected to accept that these characters are Bayonetta, but in a slightly different outfit. Then, whatever alt character they die, we have a mostly cinematic boss fight, and we move on. The subplot is that Luka turned into a werewolf off-screen for unexplained reasons, and that Viola is not so secretly Bayonetta and Luka's daughter, and everybody refuses to ask questions about why Viola is carrying around Bayonetta's childhood toy and abusing Luka's catchphrase. It is really obvious. They rotate Cheshire to be center camera right on screen, and nobody brings it up the entire time. It defies explanation. I know what's going on. I could ask questions. Why does nobody in the game? The twist in Bayonetta 3 is that there are 3 predictable twists and also 0 twists because none of them seem to matter. The big villain is the only character we don't know anything about. The Bayonettas from 1 and 2 are not the Bayonetta we've been playing as, and they show up at the end of the game. Viola is revealed as Bayonetta's daughter, but none of these things changed the final outcome of the game. Despite spending most of the game not interacting with Bayonetta, Viola inherits the name Bayonetta after fighting like a shadowy version of her that doesn't really do or say much. Lots to unpack there. But not all of these criticisms are relevant for comparing Bayonetta 3 to Bayonetta 1. What I think is important to focus on here is the shift in tone. Bayonetta inherits some traits from Dante, being a snarky, demon-fueled action hero badass. She is distinctly feminine and sometimes overtly sexual, more so in the original Bayonetta. These traits are downplayed heavily in 3, where our heroine hardly has time to quit before we need to shuffle off to another universe. The tone of Bayonetta 1 is playful, bombastic, it's over the top. Bayonetta as a character is almost explicitly limitless. If an enemy is oversized, just beat it down, and you will be rewarded with a powerful demonic summon finisher. This is a cathartic reward for taking down a difficult foe, but it also establishes a subtle promise with the player. If you can beat the challenge presented, Bayonetta will win. You can only lose due to circumstances that are in your control. Bayonetta's attitude in cutscenes is going to be continually upbeat and on top, because making it to the cutscene means that you've already won. Bayonetta 3 uses an entirely opposite tone. It's telling the story of an oppressive and overwhelming invasion, but also a story about powerlessness for your character and inevitability. We faced this invasion plot and this bleak tone in Astral Chain, and it fits there in a setting where we're not playing as a god-slaying dominatrix. When we overcome the boss and then Bayonetta gets smacked down in a cutscene, the player is being betrayed. And we get to see that like 7 times. The problem with Bayonetta 3 is that it's actually Astral Chain 2. We see an opening sequence with not only a forced loss, but a forced humbling, where we have to stumble walk Bayonetta into pathetic, useless attacks. I expected that this was foreshadowing for an Act 3 inversion, where we would be humbled but then rally out of it in classic Bayonetta fashion. And that does happen, but it also doesn't matter, and the game still proceeds to the conclusion of Bayonetta's death. The tone never shifts back to match the tone that was set in the first game, and that feels like a dismissal of the virtues of the game and the character. I don't have a clean segue from discussion of the plot into discussion of the aesthetic and pacing issues of Bayonetta 3. This is fitting, because Bayonetta 3 doesn't flow very well from moment to moment. Is it inevitable for a multiverse-hopping plot to feel so disjointed? We didn't have these problems in the plot of Bayonetta 1, so I felt this was a good topic to wrap up the comparison with. Bayonetta 1 matches us up against the Angels. Though they're somewhat mysterious in their motives, there are distinctly human-like elements in their design, as well as bird-like or beast-like attributes for certain varieties of angels. The angels can twitch and react, they express pain and surprise and fear. Sometimes they're played for comic relief. There's even a sequence where a hulking angel becomes creepily enamored with the child Cereza and runs off with her. These elements match the playful tone of the game. In Bayonetta 3, we face the homunculi. These foes are faceless and robotic. This accentuates the helplessness the game is going for, but there's nothing memorable about these enemies. The cast of foes is so large that new varieties are being introduced even in the final chapters of the game, and I don't care. The large brute-type enemy in Bayonetta 1, which I believe is called the Beloved, is displayed climbing and scrabbling and grasping, but the Bayonetta 3 counterpart doesn't demonstrate any environmental interactions. There's a broad gulf in the character of animations between the two games. When considering the larger foes, the discrepancy is naturally magnified. Our first large boss in Bayonetta 1 is Fortitude. We experience conversations beforehand that establish the haughtiness of this character, and we see them in flashbacks that are setting up a historical impact for them. Taking that boss out is its own arc in the game, and later boss angels also feature somewhat in the levels preceding them, serving as a kind of foreshadowing. In Bayonetta 3, it's difficult to distinguish proper bosses from certain large enemies, and none of them converse. They are not foreshadowed or reused. Rather than Bayonetta using a powerful summon as a finishing maneuver for each boss, she conducts a powerful summon as each boss fight begins. Rather than a fight, these conflicts are turned into extravagant minigames. I didn't always hate this. I felt as though the rhythm minigame was brilliant and a ton of fun, but it wasn't special because all of the boss fights are like this. The only proper bosses we receive in 3 are the conflicts with Luka and the Singularity. This removal of the challenge catharsis dynamic exacerbates the problems with repetition and tone. If Bayonetta can access these sorts of powers before we deplete a health bar, her power is no longer earned by the player. It's arbitrary. Certain fights are also robbed of the dramatic heights we once knew. In Bayonetta 1, the mastermind Baldur is defeated when we shoot enchanted lipstick into his skull in slow motion. The subsequent boss, Jubileus the Creator, we punch her soul into the sun. In Bayonetta 3, after 3 or 4 various interruptions, we hit Singularity with Gamora's laser, which is a cutscene representation of an attack that we can normally use, and then he crumbles and dies, despite enduring several much cooler attacks earlier on. The last hour of gameplay is distressingly offbeat, and it smacks of a design team being pulled through a crowded and unfamiliar storyboard. In conclusion, we've seen better. I'm not sure what produced this result, if this was due to a push from production towards greater marketability, or if the better aspects of the franchise simply got lost in a rush of feature creep. I would hazard a guess that a lot of design time went towards designing the alt Bayonettas and the various demons, weapons, and masquerade attacks, and that naturally detracted from the design of the enemies and the bosses. The alternate Bayonettas are certainly a highlight, which only seems to exacerbate the plot issue of them repetitively dying. Rack up about 7 on-screen Bayonetta deaths. It's really indulgent by the time it's out to the last few. I've got a few other nitpicks and a smidgen of praise that didn't make the video because they weren't a clean fit with the items I wanted to discuss, and I value brevity. If there's something you want to discuss or hear from me, a gripe or whatever, take it to the comments. I've only begun standing on the shores of content creation. Engagement or lack thereof is what will determine if I swim or stay dry. I stream on Twitch if you'd like to hear more of my voice. Twitch.tv/JupiterExile. I hope we wander again soon. If you could pitch me a like or subscribe, I'd be quite grateful. Thanks. Have a great day.